Everyone, and welcome to Book My Therapy. Today we have Sheetal Patel. She is a licensed mental health therapist and a former attorney who helps high performers, professionals, and adults navigate anxiety, mood concerns, eating disorders, trauma, and relationship issues with clarity and compassion. With over 20 years of experience in law and mental health, she specializes in stress management, life transitions, work life balance, and racial and cultural identity, particularly within the LGBTQ community. In her private practice, she works with clients to build a stronger sense of self, develop practical coping skills, and create more meaningful, connected lives that align with their values. It's a pleasure to have you on board, Sheetal. Welcome to Book My Therapy.
Thanks, Neha. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you and share some information about mental health.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, I have a few questions for you. The first one is about yourself, your background.
Mhm.
So, the first one being you began your career as a trial attorney before becoming a therapist. That's an interesting transition. So, what moment made you realize that helping people heal mattered more to you?
Well, I've always been interested in psychology and human behavior. I minored in psychology when I was in undergraduate school and just really enjoyed my classes there. I think if I had to pick a moment, was probably when I was still working as a lawyer at a big firm, and I was volunteering for an organization that was comprised of female attorneys and judges that basically volunteered our time to organizations that benefited women and children. And so I really found myself involved. I was a part of the organization for about 13 years. I co-chaired it for a couple of years, and I really found the work was meaningful to me. And I was so interested and just really dedicated to it and just enjoyed it so much that I found myself gravitating more towards that than I really did in my own legal career, which I had just found less and less fulfilling over time. It really felt like, it was about either saving my clients money, or they were paying money to other people. So it's not that money is unimportant. I think for me, I found something else that was going to be more fulfilling. So I guess if there was a moment, it was kind of understanding that even this volunteer work, just felt more fulfilling and meaningful to me. So if I could make a profession out of being able to help people, then that's what I wanted to eventually do.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
The second one is about your legal background and how it shaped the way you now work with high achieving driven clients who are used to perform under pressure. Can you help explain how that transition helped you work with high achieving and driven clients?
I mean, I think having like a similarity in terms of our legal background and a real in-depth understanding of the legal industry, as well as the stressors that people in demanding professions like lawyers, physicians, consultants, people in professions that there is, inherently a lot of stress kind of built in. And so, what you and I might look at as like typical work boundaries, like a 9 to 5, doesn't exist, in professions like that. So I think it not only has given me perspective and empathy, but also I take a very pragmatic approach with my clients when I talk about coping skills and how do we try to work towards work-life balance if that is such a thing, or if it's even possible, right? For some clients, we're just managing burnout. Like we're not healing from burnout because the trigger of the job is going to stay. People, not everybody can leave their job if the job is their primary stress trigger. Right. So then we're managing burnout, but that has to be in a pragmatic way. I don't expect my clients have the time to be able to do 3 hours of transcendental meditation, right? We have to be able to make small incremental changes that improve the quality of their life. And sometimes that is just managing the burnout.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine the kind of stressors you have to do pre and post work and be mentally active to respond to what your client wants. So, thank you for sharing that one. How did cultural values around success, responsibility, and resilience influence both your personal journey and your clinical lens today?
Well, my parents moved here many, many decades ago. I was born here. So I think like many people of my generation kind of straddling that cross-cultural line of being an Indian person who was born in America and then also having parents of Indian heritage who carried with them a lot of values. Right, very much like known to kind of the people in our immigrant community of hard work ethics, right? Definitely high achievers, high performance, an emphasis on not just family, but also very much on education, right? And the sense of community and kind of interdependency where we experience much more collectivism. But when you grow up here, right, you're kind of blending both of these cultures. So I think for me, academically, obviously taking into account kind of my own, not just my expectations, but culturally our expectations of high achievement, right? And I think it definitely helps in terms of the therapeutic relationship with my own clients, understanding like our own cultural similarities and connections and a real understanding of what that's like to kind of straddle both cultures. And it's something that many of my South Asian clients and I talk about. And even with non-South Asian clients, right? With certain kind of family values and collectivism, there are certain expectations. There's a lot of changes that are evolving, um, from our parents who emigrated here many decades ago. So learning how to navigate that in very much an ever-changing world has been challenging for many people, especially in relationships.
So you describe your work as relational rather than transactional, which is important in today's virtual, fast paced world. So, what does relational therapy look like in practice?
I think when I say relationally, things like virtual and video appointments have made it so much more accessible, have made mental health so much more accessible to people. And virtual is very, very convenient for people. I think there can absolutely be a relational end to it, despite that it is over a screen. Right. But we're not just kind of focused on things like efficiency. It's really about building a solid therapeutic relationship because the research actually shows that it's not really about the specific modalities and interventions that help move the needle in terms of client change. It's actually the therapeutic relationship. And so I spend a lot of time orienting my clients to individual therapy and helping them understand how to gain the maximum benefits of therapy, but also really focusing on building trust and rapport in the relationship, because ultimately that's part of what will help clients feel supported in making changes. If they were just looking for a quick how-to or a self-help, they could read a book on their own or Google it or use ChatGPT, right? But we're humans. We need that connection and interaction, support and guidance to make long-lasting change. Otherwise, people would just look at things on the internet and make the changes themselves. So therapy has to offer something different. And I think the relationship is exactly that. It's something that's built, sometimes on years of trust in that foundation with people.
This is so cool. Thank you for highlighting that because in today's day and age when we have answers to everything, building that foundational trust is so important. And with someone who you are vulnerable with, knowing that that information is safe and confidential, and who you're talking to is licensed and knows what they're talking about is so, so important. So thank you for sharing that take. Uh, so many of your clients navigate trauma tied to identity, culture, or intergenerational expectations. What does culturally responsive therapy really mean?
Well, I think it's meeting clients where they're at, right? Because even as someone who is South Asian, there are a lot of nuances in every family system that are specific. So I think instead of pretending that we know, it's really being able to gain an understanding from a client's perspective, right? It's much less about a diagnosis or a label. It's understanding the client's experience and asking the right questions to help them be able to gain insight and understanding around their own emotional experiences. And that's really what will help drive that behavior change, right? So a lot of the work in trauma is not just looking at like childhood trauma and events, but it's helping a person feel seen and heard and understood, respected, and valued. And those are not things that are in a how-to guide or bullet points, right? That has, it's all experiential, so it has to be built over time. So I think part of culturally responsive therapy is being able to take the time to understand each client and really being able to provide services that are individual to them. And with that, you need to take the time to really get to know them in order to understand how they will best receive guidance and support as well.
Wow, this is so different and so important, right? Thank you. I really like this conversation. This is so insightful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
So I remember you talked about burnout, right? In the very beginning of almost in the very beginning of this conversation, because when you're dealing with clients who are high achievers and high performance, it's only about managing burnouts. And now I want to take this opportunity to tie it back to us, I mean, to ask the question and tie it back to burnout, also in alignment with the digital burnout that many of us are facing. So, how is this showing up in therapy rooms, especially amongst professionals and caregivers?
Well, I think one part of how digital burnout shows up is more and more of my clients are wanting to be seen in person if they do live in the Charlotte area. Some people are even willing to drive a couple of hours because they're really craving that connection, especially when it's cultural with somebody who understands they're willing to take the time and effort out of their day to come and see someone, particularly when people, so many people are working remotely, right? Being able to have that face-to-face or in-person conversation, if that's possible, seems to be really important. Another thing that I see is, more and more people being intentional about stepping away from things like social media or screens or reducing their media consumption because people are really, I think, becoming more and more aware of the negative consequences of, not just being on social media, right? But I think it's that escapism, kind of living in this reality that is on a screen and not in person in front of them. And that's not to say there's not a lot of positives about social media and digital connections, right? But there are certain social skills that are being lost in that way. So people are really craving that actual human connection. And so being able to step away from things like social media or reduce their own media consumption, it seems like people are becoming more aware of how it's impacting them negatively, especially with things like what I would describe as emotional numbing behaviors. So, like scrolling would be one of them, video gaming is another. Just ways that people can kind of, numb their own emotions, which, right, we live in a difficult reality that sometimes has painful feelings and emotions. And so it's very much in line with kind of that human need to avoid, but unfortunately the consequences are real. When we try to numb all those negative emotions, we also thereby numb the positive ones, which can be really frustrating when you struggle with depression because you want to feel better, but the more you try to avoid or numb, that also does the same things to more of those emotions you're wanting to feel, including joy and excitement and hope.
So, what I was trying to really ask is, in your experience over 20 years and meeting with clients from different areas and backgrounds, and your own experience, what social cues did you see before, which are missing today, which are important for human connections?
Hmm. Um, that's a hard question to answer because it happens so incrementally. I think one thing I've noticed is people's comfort levels, right, with social interactions. I hear more and more people describing things, as awkward, or being uncomfortable with silence, right? Or even being able to read the room, right? Like when is the appropriate time to make this joke? When is the appropriate time to, to introduce someone else? Like people have seem to have less and less kind of intuitive social skills around that because that would require a lot of human interaction, right? So if you're behind a screen, especially alone, right? Like we're not talking about meetings, but alone, that solitude, we don't get that interaction. We don't get to practice the skills of being able to read the room, right? All of that isolation can really change. So I don't know that it's very obvious or overt. Probably with folks who were maybe in school during COVID, it's more pronounced for them because they were literally missing, really important years of socialization. And so there can be kind of, like an emotional stunting of sorts. I don't work with adolescents, so I don't know that I see it that much. I work a lot with adults. Um, so I don't know that I see as much in terms of like specific shifts.
Okay. Yeah. For someone listening to this and feels overwhelmed or hesitant to seek therapy, maybe due to stigma or cultural beliefs or biases, what first step would you encourage for them to seek help if required?
Well, I think if there's a willingness, to be able to try therapy,
Hmm.
I think a couple of things. So one is, being able to look at therapist profiles. A lot of people do that, right? Websites, but also understanding that, a profile is simply that. It's just a bunch of words from a person. You don't really get a sense of what that person is like until you meet with them. Personally, as a therapist, I do kind of like initial intro calls with all potential clients. And for me, this is really helpful in terms of seeing if this might be a good fit for us to work together in therapy and also help answer some questions, but also help make potential clients feel a little bit more comfortable before just kind of walking into a room cold with somebody that they don't know. So one of my recommendations would be, if you find some therapists online, or if you get referrals, like referrals are always a great way to get connected with, a qualified licensed therapist as well, is to try to get a phone call with someone who will at least spend 10 minutes on the phone with you. That will probably make you feel more comfortable going in. And then if you do decide to meet with someone, you know, give it some time, right? A couple of sessions doesn't always let us know, okay, am I going to be able to trust this one? Right. So maybe you give it a few sessions, maybe you give it a few months, but before you kind of call it quits on therapy, I would suggest committing to it for at least 2 to 3 months. Now, if it doesn't feel like a good fit right off the bat, right, that's kind of a different story. But sometimes we expect results really quickly, or we're like, well, I'm not making progress and it's, been 4 sessions. That's not realistic either because therapy is very much an unfolding process and it takes time before it kind of results show up, right? Therapy and results coaching are not the same thing. You really have to trust the process. So that's usually my best advice to people who are new to therapy is to trust the process. And look, if you meet a couple of therapists and it doesn't work, don't give up on it. Try someone else. There are good therapists and there are less great therapists, but it's really about finding someone who could be a good fit for you and being willing to invest in the relationship.
Well said. So, can you please explain what therapy is and what it is not?
So, therapy is a form of receiving guidance and support, right? A therapist is a licensed healthcare provider who can offer guidance and support, encouragement. Sometimes it's cheerleading, sometimes it's problem solving or advice giving to a limited extent. A therapist is someone who is not just there to validate your feelings, but to really help you gain insight and understanding around your own emotional experiences. And the hope is that that will help drive behavior change, which is often what people are looking for. Now, some people are looking for a sounding board or they're looking for something very specific in therapy. Since I've been doing this for a long time, it's pretty easy for me to meet clients where they're at because therapy is such a dynamic experience. A client could walk in with something completely unexpected and you kind of have to be able to think on your feet to be able to meet them where they're at. Now, what therapy is not is someone who is going to proverbially hold your hand through the change process. Right. I don't text clients out of session. I'm not an emergency contact for people. If you have a bad day, I'm not the person you call, right? A therapist is someone who is going to resource you, but not rescue you. And most therapists will tell you that they're not actually here to give you advice. They're here to help you decide what are the best decisions for yourself and maybe to ask some, directed self-inquiry to help you get there. But the here's what to do is probably a pretty misrepresented, I think, when it comes to, movies and how they portray therapists like somebody who's going to give it to you straight and not sugarcoat it because humans don't work that way, right? Most of us know, like, if I don't want to be depressed, I can do X, Y, and Z. But if that's all we really needed to know, then again, we would look at self-help books or just chat GPT. But people are looking for that human connection. And so that's not just going to be, hey, follow steps, one, two, and three. It is a relationship, but it's a relationship for the therapist as well, right? Like we're not just service providers, we're really invested with our patients and in their lives. Like I remember, patients' grandmothers, their childhood dogs' names, all kinds of details about people, their best friend's name, their childhood best friend's name.
Wow. Yeah, it's important to know that therapist is not your friend.
Yes, it is not a social connection. It's a professional relationship that is also a highly personal one. But
Yes.
first and foremost, a professional one, and your safety is first and foremost important,
Yeah.
right?
Well said. Well said. So, this next section is about a mix of what a typical day looks like you and your advice for future therapists, like in wrapped into different questions. So the first one is for anybody who is listening to you right now and would like to book a session with you, where can they find you? And what does a first session with you look like?
Well, in terms of where to find me, typically my website is the best way to get a hold of me in terms of like either sending in a contact form, people can call me, or you can email me. And as I said, I always do, a phone call, like just a brief 5-10 minute phone call with everyone to see if we might potentially be a good fit. So it's not just about like booking the session. It's really about, okay, let's see if I'm what you're looking for and if this is something that I can help you with as well. So reaching out to me by phone, email, or on my website, spatelservices.com is an easy way to get a hold of me. But to answer your second question, in terms of what a first session looks like, it's not a question that's easy to answer because it looks different with everyone. There are some patients who will walk in and they kind of want to dive into what their current situation is, right? I always call so the first session we call an intake appointment or an assessment session. So the first couple of sessions, I'm always really just trying to get some background and history and get a sense of, what are the different things that are influencing your current situation, right? What's your work life? Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? And so those are questions that we don't get into a lot of detail with, but it helps give me a general overview or a sense of like how to be able to evaluate the person so that I can best help them. So I would say it's more of, it's really getting background and history. We're not problem solving on day one. We're not sharing all of the details of our trauma on day one. In fact, that is highly advised against doing that because it can really be emotionally unsafe for clients when they don't have trust and rapport with someone to disclose, really personal details about potentially past childhood trauma or trauma.
I'll also add the link to your website in the description so that people can find you directly. And the next is about your advice for aspiring therapists or mental health professionals. So, what skills matter most today?
That's a great question. What matters most? I think relationally, that matter. What some of those skills that are hard to pinpoint, like having good clinical intuition, right? Like that's having a good clinical intuition is a sense of what's happening in the room. Maybe there's more going on than what this client says, right? It might be reading telltale signs that are nonverbal. Like if I can tell that my client's feeling uncomfortable without them actually telling me, or maybe a client is trying to to get a message across to me that they're not able to articulate. So some of that is by clinical intuition, and I'm not sure that that's something that can be taught, right? It's something that sometimes people have as a natural skill or innate. It's something that could also be developed over time, the more years of experience that you get. But I think simply wanting to help people is not quite enough. And, I think part of it is not just I want to help people, but that I'm able to sit with people's emotions, right? And that I'm able to focus on them in the session because it's not my therapy session, right? The session is not for me to share my own past or about my relationships. It's really about the other person. And so going through hardship, can it make you a good therapist? Sure. Resilience can help make you a good therapist. But I think there are some skills that we don't always just learn in school that help us become really, really adept therapists, being able to read the room, being able to read cues, but also being willing to have patience with people, right? People are not always as they seem. If they present as angry and you take it personally, it's going to be really hard to have a long career as a therapist. You have to be able to take a step back and realize that most people, their behaviors and beliefs are about themselves and how they see themselves in the world than it is about the person sitting across them. So I think you have to be able to take an objective lens and being able to give feedback in a way that people can receive. It's not just about don't sugarcoat it and give it to me straight. It is about real human empathy and compassion, but being, I think, gentle, firm, and direct, because I'm there to help my clients facilitate change. If they just wanted to be comfortable and, I think they were looking for validation, they can, but most people are looking to make changes. So that's going to bring up some discomfort, and we may talk about some hard things, and it may bring up some difficult emotions, but part of my work as a therapist is to help that patient experience them safely in the room.
No book, no classroom is going to teach this.
No, not really. You just have to get experience doing it.
Yeah. So this brings us to the last section, which is about technology and mental health. So with rising apps, AI tools, and virtual therapy on rise, what excites you and what concerns you, and specifically about technology's role in mental health care?
I think AI can be super helpful to, a number of mental health professionals in terms of decreasing the amount of time that it takes to do administrative tasks, sometimes like writing notes, right? I was just having a conversation with some colleagues about, whether they will record some of their patient sessions for AI's usage of creating more efficient notes. So there's a whole lot that goes into that, right? There's privacy, there's the patient's comfort. How is it going to be done? How is the information stored? How is the information deleted, right? Because these are very personal, private conversations. So having AI, as a part of that and being introduced, it depends on everybody's comfort level. So I think, with therapists, it can definitely be helpful for administrative manners. I personally don't use AI for my notes. I do my own notes and have been for many years. So I don't need another tool to kind of condense it for me. I think where, other tools like ChatGPT for mental health purposes can potentially be risky is really relying on something that doesn't really understand nuance, right? That doesn't bring into experience or being able to read a person, right? To be able to read through the lines. A human can do that. Right. And so I think that there can be risk, whether it's, suicidality or self-harm or self-injury behaviors and things like that. So trying to resolve, I think, acute and severe emotional issues via AI or digital tools, it can definitely be tricky. I'm not saying it's not possible, and I'm certainly not averse to technology, but I think, humans are unpredictable and we're multidimensional. Everything is not quite as it seems. You feed AI certain facts and information. It doesn't intuitively know everything about you. So to rely on something solely to solve such complex human problems can be limiting.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an interesting take, especially when tools designed to just provide validation and reassurance to feed the ego seem attractive, right? So,
Yes.
yeah,
Not everything is a great idea, even if ChatGPT tells you that it is.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for giving me your time. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk with you and have this conversation, share information with other people. You know, I'm really passionate about mental health. So I'm really honored that you reached out to me. And hopefully, this information can help give people access, you know, and feel a little bit more comfortable. I think making some of the changes that most people are excited to make. Just, you know, need a little bit of guidance along the way.
Thank you. I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Neha.